Well, we're moving into the 1990s, and I wanted to make a point about the wider world having to do with the theory that we're using. In 1989, we had the collapse of communism. Now, that occurred 72 years after the Russian Revolution. And that got me thinking after I got into all this. Not only did the Soviet Union collapse, but in the same, at almost exactly the same moment, so did Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia, both of which had been created as new nations right after the First World War. What I eventually concluded was that Eastern Europe, at least in the 20th century, 19th and 20th centuries, had been on a somewhat different cycle than Western Europe and the United States. And in fact, they were about a turning ahead. So they always go through the crisis while we're going through the unraveling. And that was the explanation for why they collapsed when they did. And with respect to the Soviet Union, it's very interesting that almost all of the leaders of the Soviet Union, up until Gorbachev, belonged to the revolutionary generation. That is to say, they had been young men, not necessarily at the time of the revolution itself in 1917, but certainly in the 20s, when there was a civil war and the regime was still getting going. I would guess that the high began around 1930, actually. And that as long as that generation was still in power, that had been shaped by their youth, the system limped along. But as soon as they finally left power, and Gorbachev, who I think was born in 1930, which probably does make him a prophet, the support for the regime collapsed completely, and it faded away. Now, Putin, meanwhile, since we're talking about this, I believe was born in 1950, which would put him right on the prophet nomad cusp. That's another thing that tends to verify, I think, what I'm saying about the Soviet cycle. They definitely had an awakening in the 50s as soon as Stalin died. A lot of people got let out of prison, but also Khrushchev denounced Stalin, which was a really revolutionary act. But also restrictions on writing loosened up, the whole atmosphere changed, and Solzhenitsyn, for instance, was allowed to publish one book anyway, which he never would have been in the past. So anyway, Putin does strike me as more of a nomad, but he came in more or less at the end of the crisis that Russia went through, beginning with the collapse of communism, and he has created a certain degree of stability. Okay, here's Susan. Very good. Yes, where is she? Yeah. Susan? She officially.
I had trouble finding the
link. Okay.
The meeting ID.
Okay. I'm just talking a little about the cycle as it applied to Russia and the Soviet Union, and that they had crises in the First World War, and then at the end of the 1980s. And now they are already in a high. And Putin is coming across as more of a high leader. I think China is much closer to our cycle, although maybe a few years behind. But we don't need to get into that. Any comments on that? Okay. Now, reaching the early 90s, we are also seeing the end of the long tenure in power of the GI generation, 32 years in the White House. I looked a little bit at the George H.W. Bush administration, and it was very interesting. He was literally a last wave GI, born in 1924. I could not find a single other GI in his whole administration. He had a boomer vice president. the whole cabinet seemed to be from the silent generation. He was very much a GI himself. The war that he led us into and very quickly out of was in a way a tribute to the principles of his youth, since it was the first and practically the only time that the UN functioned the way it was supposed to function when it was first put together, namely to assemble a huge coalition to deal with one act of aggression. Bush was a very smart guy in foreign affairs, without question. And I will never forget, Kevin, I think you must have been there too. Yes. In June of 2001, George H.W. Bush gave the commencement speech at the War College, where Kevin and I were both working. And he devoted most of the speech to talking about the Gulf War. And he gave a brilliant strategy and policy lecture, that was the name of our department, on why it would have been a terrible mistake to march all the way to Baghdad and overthrow Saddam Hussein. And I thought about that speech many times in the next few years. However, Bush also showed some responsibility on the domestic front when he violated his campaign promise and agreed to raise taxes and began getting us back on the road to fiscal sanity, which Clinton continued. But he had evidently lost touch with the temper of the country. And meanwhile, and here we come to our reading, one of our readings, our short reading. A new force was coming up in the Republican Party, a boomer, absolute first baby boomer, Newt Gingrich, and he had formed GOPAC. He had, I believe, already overturned the speakership of Jim Wright, a silent, and he was trying to give a new tone, shall we say, to the Republican Party. Now, what would you say about the long-term historical significance of his vocabulary list, which I posted for you? Would you like to hear some of it again? Oh, okay. Words to use about ourselves, about Republicans. Share, change, opportunity, legacy, challenge, control, truth, moral, courage, reform, prosperity, crusade, movement, children, family, debate, humane, pristine, provide, liberty, commitment. Well, I think that's enough. And words to use about the other side, to draw contrast. Decay, failure, collapse, crisis, urgent, destructive, destroy, sick, pathetic, lie, liberal, they, unionized bureaucracy, compassion is not enough, betray, consequences, limits, shallow, traitors, sensationalists, in danger, coercion, hypocrisy. Hold on, I got to admit, yes. Okay, I think that's enough to get the general flavor. Janie?
Okay, well, first of all, I appreciate you putting the words up and being a writer, and words matter. But I thought I would share, Bill was writing scathing songs about Newt Gingrich at that time. He did an album called A Whole New World, and he cast Newt as Phantom of the Opera. And it was hilarious, but it was really scathing with what Bill saw as the direction that Newt was going in. So anyway.
Okay. Yes, Jocelyn.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, it seems like kind of the beginning of this hyper-polarized, hyper-partisan sort of attitude that we're still dealing with. It's just gotten worse. Like the elections of 1996, right? The midterms where...
1994.
1994.
Right, yeah.
Okay, well, the midterms after
Yeah.
Clinton's first election.
That's right.
And,
yeah, that's 94, yeah.
okay, and where where, yeah, I mean, Newt Gingrich set that up as, you know, it's us versus them, and the Republicans took over at that point in Congress. So.
Yes. I would suggest that this is, again, trying to exploit emotion rather than thought. And particularly the negative words are as loaded as they can be and designed to excite the most negative possible emotions. And that this has continued ever since, certainly on the Republican side, probably to some extent on the Democratic as well, although not really among any of the actual Democratic presidential candidates, I don't think. But it has been a very profound change. It's funny because I was thinking a lot as I watched the movie, although I wanted to delay the detailed discussion of the movie for a while. As you get toward the climax at the end, and they're trying to decide what kind of tactics they're going to use to get the nomination, Susan and Jack keep coming back to the idea that if they don't get rid of Larry Hagman, that the Republicans will use this, and he's nominated, the Republicans will use it against them and they'll be elected. And given this is based on the 1992 campaign, although they never refer to an incumbent Republican president in the movie, what they're talking about is the re-election of George H.W. Bush, which in retrospect, I am unable to regard actually as a horrible catastrophe for the United States that had to be avoided at all costs. But for them, it was apparently easy to feel that way and to make that argument. Actually, there are two Republican presidents in my lifetime who I now feel that I didn't appreciate nearly as much as I should have when they were in office. George H.W. Bush is one, and Gerald Ford actually was the other. But that's another story. Okay. Gingrich, I think, you could argue is the most influential single boomer in American political life with respect to this kind of tactic, with respect to how he handled the speakership of the House. And now he even emerged as probably, yeah, the biggest ally from the Republican establishment of Donald Trump. And I think he's been quite influential there. This was also the moment at which the Republicans got committed to tax reform at all costs. Michael, I think I've asked you this before, but I want to check. Did you actually know Grover Norquist in college?
No, I did not. I did not know Grover Norquist.
Is he actually in your class? If he isn't, he's like 1 year away.
Yeah, I don't believe he was. He certainly doesn't show up in the red book, so I don't.
Oh, right. Then I guess he wasn't. But he was right around that time. He's the last wave boomer or first wave Xer. I think he's the last wave boomer. And he formed this organization that got every Republican to pledge never to raise taxes. And it's really been very influential. And actually, yes, next week, I will try to come back with another quote of his, which is extremely revealing. Okay. Now, before we get to the movie, I want to say some other things about this whole boomer relationship, boomer-Xer relationship, which is at the heart of what we're doing, both last week, where we saw it in business, and this week in politics. But there are other layers to it. And in fact, the boomer-Xer relationship has been the source of a number of really great movies, in my opinion. Probably the first one, which goes all the way back to 1983, and I'm not going to use a clip from it, was An Officer and a Gentleman, in which Richard Gere, playing a first wave Xer, is trained, broken, and rebuilt, if you will, by Foley, the drill sergeant. He's played by a silent Lou Gossett, but he's a Vietnam veteran, so I'm assuming he's a boomer. Actually, he would almost have to be a boomer to be a sergeant at that point. And Foley, in my opinion, is really the greatest sergeant in the history of the movies. And it's really quite an inspiring film in that sense. Another one, which I've used, is a Spike Lee movie, one of my favorite Spike Lee movies, although hardly anybody
Better
else
than
seems to remember.
Sergeant Full Metal Jacket.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Much better, I think. Yeah. Full Metal Jacket is pretty much a cartoon, really. But anyway. Another, Clockers is the Spike Lee movie, and Clockers actually is very similar to Wall Street. Both of them are about a young up-and-coming Xer with a boomer mentor in business. The difference being that Clockers takes place in Brooklyn, on the streets of Brooklyn, and the business is selling crack cocaine. But at the same time, the young man is pulled in another direction as well. And it's a movie I highly recommend. And then last but hardly least is one that I do want to show you two clips from, Good Will Hunting, because I'm being rather negative about boomers here. But actually, I think that they have been able to contribute in a lot of ways, but usually at a whole different level, if you will, of society. So I would guess that most of you have seen Good Will Hunting at one time or another. Has anybody not seen it? Good. All right, well, this is the first meeting between Will, who's on his way to jail unless he can be placed with the therapist, and Sean, played by Robin Williams. Sean is a boomer. He graduated from MIT in 1972, but he'd also been in Vietnam, apparently, although we never learned the details about that. So he's pretty much a first wave boomer. And here is their first conversation, and then I'm going to show you their second conversation. And these are really, I think, very interesting generational portraits. So, do you see it? Hello?
No,
Oh, God. All right, here we go again. God, I thought I had done everything. All right, wait.
no,
No.
Okay, I know. Wait,
we're waiting.
yes, I know you are. All right. Where was them? Okay.
Huh.
Okay, here we go again. Okay? Hold it. For some reason.
Can't hear.
I know, I paused it. The volume's very low. Okay, here we go. I can hear. I don't recall that there's a setting on that. Wait. Okay, let's start over. Oh, okay. Yes, I see what happened. Sorry. All right. Starting at the beginning. Okay, that's my connection. Let's just give it a minute. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I'll try again.
Oh, you like art? You like music?
We can hear the audio of it, but we can't, it's not,
Well, tell me what you really think.
not moving. Yeah.
You can see a picture, but it's frozen.
Yep.
Yeah,
I have no idea what that could be.
The back of Matt Damon.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's what that is.
All right, let's start over again one more time.
Bunch of hair left.
Moving.
Hey, you know
No.
you're shoving that cigarette up your ass. It probably.
All right, just a second. I just don't understand. Comments? Okay, Jude, and then Susan.
No, I don't have any.
Okay, Jude. Yeah.
Matt Damon wrote that, right?
Actually, he and Affleck got the Oscar for writing it. I have read an article by a longtime screenwriter, I believe, named Liam Goldman. Although I could be wrong about that, in which he indicated that he had. So I don't know, but
really?
well, let's assume the Academy was right. But yes, Damon and Affleck got credit for writing it.
Well, it's a beautifully elliptical thing. Then they're writing what an old person or whatever a boomer would think about a Gen Xer and they're Gen Xers, so they're projecting what they've received from boomers in the past, and I mean, first of all, it's great to hear a proper Boston accent. You don't hear that very often, and you didn't hear one from Robin Williams.
No, you didn't. That was unfortunate. Although I thought he deserved the Oscar. Yeah.
Ben Affleck in The Town nails it also.
Yeah.
The Boston accent. But first of all, it's a Boston scene. Young people in Boston are very cruel, and they take it out on their elders more than anyone. So it's an ingenious scene, but then they're playing a game of strategy, which of course I like, and it's ingenious. But Matt Damon wins the first round, and Robin Williams wins the second round, and they're just profiling each other and then making moves, and eventually they get to sort of a cooperation.
Okay. Other comments?
Yeah.
Yes,
Going
Steve.
to what Jude said about it being an Xer's perspective of what Xers think a boomer would say about them. Well, I'm thinking about how Xers are projecting this idea that the boomers must have had a more authentic inner experience than Xers did. So that scene kind of reflects that Xer anxiety about not having had the truly authentic, meaningful life that boomers did before them. So I think
actually, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, actually, that comes off in a different way in a later scene with him, when Damon is so envious that Robin Williams was actually going to go to Game 6 in the 1975 World Series, which is just a legend for him, but for every boomer Red Sox fan like myself, was one of the great nights of my entire life. But yeah, okay. Okay, Jude said Damon won the first, Will won the first round, Sean won the second round. How did they win their respective rounds? Okay, Jude.
They got the last word.
Oh. Well, I think there's more to it than that.
I would say they push each other to feel something.
Yes.
What happens.
Okay. Okay. Will just manages to zero in. He manages to find Sean's weak spot, and he goes right for it. But Sean does something completely different, and he describes what he did right at the beginning, in the opening of the speech. He put Will in perspective, and he realized the advantage that he had that Will didn't have, which was another 20 years of life and all the experiences that he'd had, which Will had not had. And he's going to use that, again, well, first of all, not to let Will treat him as an equal, but to also put more perspective on Will's life and what they're doing there than Will was able to do. So that is actually using wisdom in a good cause. As long as we're here, and I wasn't going to do this, but I can't resist. I'm going to play you one other scene from that movie, which Will is not in. It's between Sean and his old MIT roommate, the professor who discovered Will and who has been arguing with him about Will's future. And this comes down to a big confrontation. And this scene is special for me, I have to admit, because I actually played it, although it was mostly by email, with one of my oldest college friends a few years ago. But let's see, where is it? Yeah. Okay, we're set, so. Yep. Okay, you see it? Okay, here we have two types of boomers. How would you distinguish them?
Sellout versus non-sellout.
Okay. How do you define sellout? Hang on, Michael.
Rubbing one's nose in the success that they've managed to achieve.
Okay.
And usually that, for boomers, that came along with, not always, but usually that came along with basically pandering to what people wanted to hear, especially in the third turning.
Okay. Michael?
So I see it a little differently. I see the mathematician character having that both of them followed things that appealed to them, but the mathematician character, it so happened that his application lay along a line that society was prepared to recognize in a specific way, with the Fields Medal, with his MIT professorship, with other things, so that he was gratified and judged a quote unquote success by the terms that society used. Whereas the Robin Williams character, the things that seemed to motivate him, or that he enjoyed, or in which he felt like he could live his most fully realized life, were in that profession. And again, I don't get the sense that Robin Williams in that clip is being inauthentic or sarcastic. I believe he is being genuine and saying that these are things that matter to him, and the things that the other character, the mathematician character, achieved would not have appealed to him, and that he actually doesn't resent the other character. He's just trying to keep he's trying to keep the other character from forcing his view on Matt Damon, rather than letting Matt Damon pick a way of life that appeals to Matt Damon.
Yeah. Okay, John.
I kind of identify with the role of Sean in that, because I taught at community colleges for a great many years. And I realized when I was there that I basically had to forget everything I learned in graduate school, everything, if I was going to reach these students, because they were not groomed for going to places like MIT, Columbia, Harvard. Many of them were first generation college students, or first members of their family to go to college. They had no idea what college was. And if I was going to cling to the kind of jargon and professional training I had, I never would have gotten through to any of these students. And I think that in many ways, Sean's colleague was more like Will. He lived in his head, and he made a living off living in his head. And because of who Will was, he couldn't relate that way if he was going to be successful with his students. And I understand totally what that's about. It's very, very difficult.
Yep. So you have to be able to think about somebody else and where
Yes.
they're coming from.
And where they're coming from.
Anybody else? It is an interesting contrast. And again, Jerry, the professor, is the famous world-renowned boomer. Sean, nobody will have ever heard of, but who's contributed more? It's an interesting question. Yeah, Jude.
I think Michael was on it, and I think John was on it. I just want to crystallize maybe Stellan Skarsgård or whatever. He was into himself, and Robin Williams was into the boy. So there you have the two kinds of boomers.
Yes.
You know, one who's playing by an old time rule, a high rule, and one who's playing by an unraveling rule.
Right. Okay. To link to the movie, because this is about Boston, I want to make one very small point about the movie that we watched this week before we get any further. You remember the scene in the donut shop where, yes, right. What was wrong with that picture?
Oh, it was Nighthawks, first of all.
It was what?
Nighthawks, the famous Edward Hopper painting.
No, I'm talking about in primary colors. What?
Yeah.
Krispy Kreme and not Dunkin' Donuts.
Yes, exactly. Yes. It is a New England joke that the answer to the question, where is that, is near the Dunkin' Donuts. And the only explanation, and in the book, it is a Dunkin' Donuts. So I guess they got more money from Krispy Kreme than Dunkin' Donuts. So
yeah,
that's why it was Krispy Kreme. But anyway,
but
all right.
Look at the painting, the Edward Hopper painting. Mike Nichols took the frame from that painting.
Oh, okay, okay. Susan?
I thought the same thing. That's what I saw there too.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
A lot of noirs use that Edward Hopper diner.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I watch this movie every few years, and it never ceases to amaze me. A little background about the movie and the book. Okay, how many of you ever read Primary Colors? Just one. Oh my. Okay, well the movie is very faithful to the book, although the book has more depth in some ways. Now, how many of you ever read another great American political novel? In my opinion, the greatest, All the King's Men. A number of people have read All the King's Men.
A long time ago.
Okay, well, Joe Klein, we'll get to that aspect of it in a minute, the author, was clearly inspired by it. And in fact, several of the names are more or less taken out of All the King's Men. There's a Stanton family in All the King's Men. The narrator in All the King's Men, who is the Henry Burton character, is named Jack Burden. Okay, Jack Burden, Henry Burton. Let's see, those are the main ones, right? And All the King's Men, the governor is Willie Stark, who was based very clearly on Huey Long, and it's a wonderful book. It also has a very dramatic suicide at its climax, actually even more dramatic. And Klein was clearly inspired by it. Now, the book was published anonymously in, I think, 1995 or so, or 6. That made it even more of a sensation because everybody was trying to guess who it was. There was something very interesting that happened in the midst of that controversy. I read an article by a guy who had written a program that could tell you, based on use of language, if two things were written by the same person. and he said in the article, it was Joe Klein. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And he laid out why. But it wasn't for many more months, maybe years, until somebody discovered some documentary proof that leaked out somehow. So Klein had to admit it. And Klein was a boomer journalist. Now, how many of you took the trouble to look up in that little glossary I linked for you to match the who's who with the characters? Michael did, but most of you did not. Okay, did you realize who Henry Burton was based on? Henry Burton was based on. Are we frozen? Uh-oh. No, we're not frozen. Yes, Jude?
Was it George Stephanopoulos, right?
Yes, it was George Stephanopoulos. Yes, with the racial angle thrown in. Yeah. Okay, and everybody else, well, maybe we'll get to them. Some of them are composites. Now, as I was mentioning before most of you got here, I had a fascinating experience at the War College. At the time the book and the movie came out, and I taught it. I taught the book, I think. And there was an Air Force officer, I believe, who took the class, who had almost just come from the White House, where in the Clinton White House, where he had served as what is called a football carrier, which is one of the guys who carries the nuclear codes around. And because he carries the nuclear codes around, he is within reach of the president all day, every day. And he had a lot of interesting things to say. And actually, one of the other things that happened that year was that the Lewinsky scandal broke. And this guy, who didn't seem to have strong political views and was very level-headed, his initial reaction was that it couldn't be true, because he said that there's no way it could happen. The president is never alone. It turned out that it was a little more complicated than that. But he talked a lot about working with the Clintons. He talked a lot about filling in the blanks in the characters and how several of the characters were composites. He also said that Bill's meetings were kind of annoying because, well, what was annoying was he was always late. He was always 10 or 15 minutes late because he was smoozing in the hall with somebody. Whereas Hillary's meetings started right on time. And I think it was he, although I did have this confirmed multiply, the foul-mouthed aspect of the Susan Stanton portrait of Hillary, he confirmed was absolutely true. Which didn't really surprise me. But anyway, okay. Now, to begin with, let's look at the Exer-Boomer relationship, and how would you compare it to Bud and Gordon Gekko last week, the relationship of Henry Burton to the Stantons? Susan, you're mute. You're mute.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I keep myself mute until I want to
Sure.
speak and wave my hand at. I guess, but shall I say something?
Sure. I thought you were trying to get into it. Go ahead.
No, but I was moving around and sort of pondering the question. But one of my first thoughts was that the Gecko character and what's his face, the young man, what was his name again? Remind me.
Yeah. Bud.
So a Gecko's trying to make him in his own image. Whereas, I'm sorry, but my brain has, John Travolta, he's not trying to do that with Henry. He's because he's basically, is trying to appreciate Henry's ability to do stuff for this, for the campaign. But he's still in his own way, kind of trying to put something over on him in terms of, his persona and his credibility and his his being sort of on a pedestal in Henry's eyes. That's
Okay.
what that my initial thoughts.
Okay.
Could you ask the question again? Could you
Compare
repeat
the
it?
relationship of Bud
Yeah.
to Gecko and the relationship of Henry
Right.
to the Stanleys.
I think there are a lot of because there are similarities in the personalities of all four of them. I mean, the two protagonists, the two big guys and the two subordinates. There's lots of similarities in the way they operate, even though they're in very different arenas.
Right. Generational theory works.
Yeah.
No.
There we go. Well, I don't know if that's, I don't know.
Okay. Nobody else has anything to say about that? Yes, Jude.
Well, you have to contrast Henry and Bud. One is a prep school kid
Yes.
who has a degree of confidence, and one is he's maybe a little chip on his shoulder, and he look, I wasn't a prep school kid, and so I know how Bud felt, surrounded by prep school kids. But you have to understand that there's a difference, I think, between Gecko and Bill Clinton too, because the flashes of genius that Gecko shows are, financial maneuvering and other kinds of tilting the table, making the game unfair. But the flashes of brilliance that Bill Clinton shows are really A, political genius, and B, he seems to really, be a regular guy at a certain point in time. So the Xers are very different, and the boomers are very different. So the relationship is, exponentially different. It's not just that both boomers are the same and only the Xers are different. You have four very different characterizations.
Well, it seems to me in both cases, the Xer is looking to the boomer
Yes,
to lead him into something he really wants.
exactly. They're searching.
Yeah, in Bud's case, it's money.
Yeah.
In Henry's case, it's being close to the president and so on. Oh, by the way, since you brought that up, I checked on this. Stephanopoulos was not a prep school guy at all. I think he went to. He may have gone to religious school. I'm not sure, but he certainly was not a prep school guy, although he went to Columbia. So I don't know why Klein threw that in addition to changing his race.
Right.
But anyway, he did. Yes, Jocelyn.
Yeah, I just was curious about kind of the idea of the Gen Xer looking to be guided or led into something by the boomer. Wouldn't that be would that also be similar to the relationship between a GI and a silent?
It could be. Sure, it could be with any younger and older person. Yeah. But in this case, well, Henry is more reserved than Bud. And that's one of the things I love about the movie is that actually almost all the extra characters, maybe all of them, are on an even emotional keel. And all the boomers are going nuts 24/7 in one way or another. Well, I mean, Susan isn't nuts in the same way, but she's awfully intense. By the way, I once heard Emma Thompson say that was the most exhausting role she had ever played. I mean, it was really a struggle for her. But
yeah, I mean, it seemed to me that all the boomers in this movie were exhibiting characteristics that maybe we tend to think of as boomers, just kind of out there and, just a little on the wild side, or,
Right.
so
Eh,
it seemed to be
yes.
authentic if we believe those stereotypes.
And you might speculate, without the Xers to help them, the campaign would be nothing but a disaster from start to finish, because they would never be able to agree on anything or get anything done. Yes, Janie.
Explain to me how Henry exhibits the Gen X characteristics. Now that you say that he was sort of more on an even keel, less emotional, okay, I get that. What else would you say is how he fits the Gen X type for him?
Those are the main things that that's the main thing I would identify. There's also the thing that Chaz likes to talk about, that he does have a sense of honor, and he doesn't want to do anything really against his principles, although he is drawn into doing so. Maybe our resident Xer, Steve, might want to comment on that.
I'm sorry, we're dealing with our light situation.
Oh, yes, we can see that, actually.
Can you repeat the question?
In what way do you think Henry is a typical Xer? If you do.
I'll let Chas answer that, since he's got his hand raised.
Okay, Chaz.
He wants to believe, and yet
Yes.
he knows better, kind of thing. That's the dichotomy it is, and to quote the X-Files.
You got garbled there for me. Again, I'm sorry, I got garbled.
So he wants to believe, but he knows better. To kind of quote the X-Files popular phrase from the 90s. He wants to believe, but
okay, yeah, yes. And isn't that a moving moment? It is for me, when he says to Susan in their first conversation, "You had Kennedy." I never had anybody like that. Yeah, right. Okay. Yes, Jude.
Looking at your voting history that you wrote in your blog, he's an Xer in another way, in that the Xers have picked the right candidate every single time, and he certainly picked the right candidate in the movie.
Oh my God, I guess that's right.
They picked exactly the right person.
I did not actually notice that. I mean, I think you're right. That's in the data, but I haven't noticed that.
Including all the whipsawing and everything. They just wrote it.
Yeah, son of a gun. Okay. Now, Henry does also give me an opportunity to bring up something else, which we haven't discussed. And here I owe a debt to Neil Howe for crystallizing my thinking. Because Henry is Black. Have any of you given any thought to whether the generational theory works across racial boundaries? Yeah, I know you have, Chaz, because we've been going at it for years, but anybody else? Okay, Michael.
So I've been thinking about this while I've been thinking about generational theory generally, and a lot of what's in, and again, I haven't lived this experience, so I don't know, but it does seem that Fourth Turning is written from the perspective of people who come from a milieu like we do. And I'm very curious how it translates to people who don't, who come from a different milieu. So I've thought about it. I don't have any answers.
Okay.
But I don't have a, I don't have a strong conclusion.
Okay, Chaz.
Well,
and then Janie.
I sat in with Ryan and Cole and Darius as they developed their.
Excuse me. I think you better tell them who they are.
Well, Ryan, everyone has met.
Yes, Ryan has met. You have met. Yeah.
And then Cole and Darius are younger millennials who have worked for the Maryland State Assembly
Yes.
relatively recently. In
And
any,
and they are also black.
and
Yeah.
they are also black, yes. And what they came to was they did a big analysis on African American personas, and they came to a kind of conclusion that there's a split in the African American community, basically based upon if your ancestry comes more from the northern states or from the southern states.
Oh, okay.
The northern states, there's a bit more integration among that community. If you have that ancestry of like you were freed before the Civil War kind of thing, there's a bit more of an integration in terms of like generational alignment. The southern states, there's a bit of a lag, and they came to the hypothesis that that the reason why is because Reconstruction went so horribly wrong, and that because there's like a turning delay for the African American community, especially for the southern African American community.
That's very interesting. I'll have something more to say about that in a second, but I want to go to Janie. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Chad, I think that is sort of leads into an excellent interpretation of when Bill and Neil were sort of came upon the theory in the first place, that one of the major engines of generational change and having, such a thing as a generational mood or a personality is that people have to have the freedom to be able to correct the mistakes or the trajectory of their parents, and they have to be able to have change within their life. And that was when, in sort of going back in history, there was a point at which Bill always felt that when you have a solidified society where, as a son or a daughter, you have to do exactly what your parents did because that's the way it was. There's no opportunity to correct yourself or have a different experience. And so I think that in terms of oppression, poverty, inability to actually drive change for yourself in your own personal way, I think tends to dampen as you said, slows the change that can come. But at the same time, I think that kind of frustration and particularly drives a huge turning, which I think we're seeing now. And when all of a sudden there seems to be the opportunity to drive huge change, that pent up, anger, frustration, oppression helps to actually drive the change than where you get a much more diverse group of people who hop onto the fourth turning and just really push through to the next high. So yeah, I would agree with what you said, Chaz.
Yeah, and
okay.
Brian and Cole and Darius came up with the idea that the southern black community is starting to get the opportunity to integrate with around the millennial generation. You're starting to see more of an integration of experiences there.
Well, and it's not just integration, it's opportunities for change. It's opportunities to actually get to where they want to go and actually have the right to go. So
okay, what Neil said to me about 10 years ago, and again, I think I had a similar thought, but he crystallized it. Actually, the archetypes tend to show up more clearly among minorities than among totally mainstream people. And I really think that's true, and I've seen a lot of examples of that. And actually, Chaz, going back to what you were saying about the difference between Southern black people and Northern black people, nobody's ever tried to do this, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if you saw a parallel difference in Southern white people as well. Simply because, yes, that Reconstruction experience made things different, and the crisis, you could argue, was going on a lot longer in the South than it was in the North after the Civil War. but I'm content to leave it at that right now. I mean, just to give a couple of examples from my community, it would be hard to find a more archetypal GI than Jackie Robinson. Martin Luther King is one of the most distinguished and representative people from the silent generation. And Gen X Black kids did a tremendous amount to set the whole cultural tone for Gen X, particularly by inventing hip hop. So that is my opinion. And again, I don't want to be drawn into a long debate now, but just to give you that to think about perhaps, and maybe we'll be able to come back to it down the road. But meanwhile, let's get into these very interesting characters that we looked at, particularly since they definitely have a basis in reality. What do you think of Jack Stanton, or Bill Clinton, if you prefer to think of it that way, as the first boomer to get into the White House? And does that tell us anything in particular about changing times? Yep, Jocelyn? Oh, no, Janie, did you?
I was going to say much more inner-driven, emotional. You know, I feel your pain. I mean, that was Clinton's gift to the political scene, and the acceptability that it was okay to do that. The other piece in this movie, however, you know, knowing that it was done in the 1990s, is again, by and large, the forgiveness of the womanizing, and that's, you know, it's okay. That just comes with the package, but clearly the acceptance of, you know, in the beginning of the movie where they talk about the handshake and grabbing the arm and the shoulder and the physical touchiness of the whole thing.
Yes, well, that many politicians have that. And in fact, Lyndon Johnson was famous for that as well.
But he was not as emotional.
No, but he loved to put his arm around anybody at
Kissing
any time.
they all do that.
Yeah,
That's right. And I must say, having, you know, spent a lot of time in that world, that what is irritating is the proclivity for kissing women. I get very tired.
Yes, right. No, but I mean,
kissing the women. You get into a shaking hands and, you know, the picture taking, and then they always got to kiss you, and it's like, really?
Oh, okay. But you know, my parents were very social GIs, and you know that was a very standard form of greeting between the sexes then too. Not on the mouth.
Women don't kiss the men. It's the men kiss the women.
Okay. I never asked
Tired
at
of
the time. Does it bother you that somebody with his personal proclivities got into the White House?
Well, I'll just say that certainly with the you know, close-up view that we had.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, it is pretty revolting. It's hard to just say that's politics, you know, just to brush it off in terms of the film, you know, the film itself. I mean, it's very, it's, you know, like Kathy Bates, you know, goes off and, you know, shoots herself, kills herself. It's a different experience from the actual, you know, from reality where you know, you're a long ways away from it all. You're hearing about it, but you're, you know, the film itself, I think, definitely has that impact of, you know, making it seem very
Okay.
kind of disgusting.
Yeah, Steve.
He's kind of, he's really, I mean, and he's kind of a revolting character. I mean, you have to hand it to him for the charm.
Yes.
But beyond that, and his his ability to his persuasive abilities. But if you scratch, there isn't much underneath there. But you don't get to see in this film. You don't get to see, how he actually, what happens, what he does in the
Right.
when as president. So you're just kind of stuck with, we've got this rather. I mean, the whole thing when Clinton, there was so many sordid and revolting things about Clinton anyway in the, during his White House years, but there were other things that were good. I don't know.
Okay, Steve was waiting.
I was going to say that Kathy Bates' character doesn't kill herself because Stanton is such a sleazeball and womanizer. She kills herself when she realizes that he's willing to use another politician's sleazebaggery or his hidden past,
his misconduct,
in that hypocritical way. So I get the idea is that the boomers are more forgiving of sexual peccadillos and don't think of that as something that should stop someone from being able to get into the halls of power.
Well, because by the time the Clintons came into office, we all knew about Kennedy's proclivities. I think there was a huge change once all of that started coming out. And we were like, you mean the god of our politics was womanizing with just about everybody, and he had the most beautiful woman standing at his side as his wife, and yet he was sleeping with everybody, including Marilyn Monroe. So by the time Clinton came around to us, it was just old hat.
Well, what about Roosevelt?
Yes, he was no slouch either. Janie has been waiting.
Yeah, I think that when Clinton was elected, and it truly was the first real boomer president, and I think generationally in those in politics, there was real excitement. I remember that inauguration; it was very exciting, and at that point, it was sort of men will be men, and that was accepted at the time. We didn't see the Lewinsky stuff yet, so. Boomers were, we elected him and people were very excited and happy, and we were finally going to get somebody who really cared about the regular person, which certainly in the movie, that plays up a lot. And I think that was genuine, and the I feel your pain got him elected.
Okay, now we've got Kevin and John.
Yeah, I guess it certainly, I saw the movie a long time ago and then watched it again here. But and I had two very different experiences, I think, from that period of time in between. Obviously, when you're heroes, when the people you've worked very hard for, to see them rise to positions of high leadership, when they turn out to be not who you thought they were, it's very discouraging, very disillusioning. Maybe enough to make you suicidal. But, you would hope that your leaders operate from a basis of principles to do good. But people who are less principled and not very appealing can also do some good. And then you have leaders who are principled who can do some real bad. And, and so I think it's, to me, it's not so much giving these political leaders a pass for their flaws. And it's not judging them by their accomplishments instead of in their personal lives and their personal problems. But, I think there is an aspect where, just to kind of keep yourself sane, you try to separate that from your decisions about political leaders and other leaders. But certainly from that period of time in the military, we were going through, tremendous transitions in terms of our relationships with other races, cross-gender relationships. I mean, it was just the whole women in combat debates that were going on, and it was really disturbing. And you saw a lot of really principled people say some really ugly and stupid things in that period of time, and I think that just goes on all the time.
All right, I would like to. I'm sorry to cut one or two people off, but we got a lot to do. I want to say what I think. All right. First of all, I grew up around politics. My father was in the government. And actually, this is very interesting because my father did not know John Kennedy well, but he was appointed an ambassador by him. He was in some meetings with him. But he knew all about Kennedy's habits, but he never would have said anything to us or to anybody else while he was in office, while he was alive, because my father was a pro and didn't want to get anybody into trouble about something like that. Now, so many politicians in so many eras have had these habits that and some of them have been great leaders and some of them have been terrible leaders. I still feel it isn't really very important. What I think is incredible about our era, which has to do with the change in the press more than anything else, is that we know so much about it and they're still going on, which obviously has reached a climax under the present administration. And if anything is ever going to be bad enough to turn it around, you would think this would be it. But who knows? So that's maybe the difference among boomers, is the feeling that it can be so out of the open, and you can go on TV with your wife and talk about it, and still you're just going to go on, which GI politicians never would have done. Again, what exactly this says about us and whether we can go on this way, I don't know. But to me, that's the big change. The thing that bothers me more about Jack is, and about Bill Clinton in retrospect, it's not clear to me that there is any really great cause that he wants to accomplish in office. And he didn't really do much in office at all to arrest the unfortunate trends that were beginning in American life, particularly on the economic front. He didn't do much in foreign affairs, although I think he did. I think he showed some talent in foreign affairs a couple of times, but he didn't use it very much. So the phony part of him, to me, in the movie, is the idea that this really is hugely important to the future of civilization for Jack Stanton to get into the White House, because it really didn't turn out that way.
We lost you, David.
I'm sorry. The thing that always seems to me to be hypocrisy in the movie is the idea that he really is a white knight, and it's so important to get him into the White House, because you don't see that in the movie, and I don't think you really saw that about him when he was in the White House, although I think he did, he did a reasonably good job. But meanwhile, we wasted so much time on so many scandals, some of which were really trivial, and some of which were less so. Yeah, Jude.
There's something cool about the movie from the perspective of a creative person, which is it works on many levels.
Oh, yes.
And there's really serious parts to it. And there's this sort of couplet, it's never the cheat who goes to hell. It's always the one who he cheated on. That pretty much explains why Hillary maybe didn't get those 50,000 votes that she needed, was that, she was being punished for being the one who he cheated on. So that's not an insignificant observation. It comes out of nowhere in the movie, but it just has this terrible ring of truth to it. Also, on the last black frame, before the universal slide comes up, a song begins. It's orchestrated as though it's for the Marine Band, but it is not Hail to the Chief. Anyone remember what the song was that came up?
I remember noticing it, but now I can't remember what it was. No.
You got it, Chaz?
Yes, Chaz?
The Tennessee Waltz was.
Oh,
playing
yes,
at-
yes, that's right. That's right.
Which I
It's
thought-
Tennessee Waltz. Yeah.
But that's
What
not
a
the song. That's not the song that played. The song that played was Camptown Races.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yes,
And-
yes,
and
that's right.
Camptown Races,
That's right.
no
That's
matter
right.
how you orchestrate it, is the theme song of Foghorn Leghorn, which is a big white chicken from the South. And there's that scene where he comes walking toward you with a drumstick. Do you remember what I'm saying?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
Mike Nichols and Elaine May telling you what they think about Bill Clinton.
Right, right.
It's a beautiful little thing.
Well, I thought one of the most poignant themes in the movie was the split between Susan and Henry on the one hand and all the Southerners on the other that draws them together. And that line of hers about, oh, they're in a mamathon that can last
Mamathon.
all night. That is maybe the funniest line of the movie. Yeah.
It's great.
All right. Now, I have never known anybody who could arouse such powerful negative and positive feelings, and may I say, among both men and women, than Hillary Clinton.
Right.
And I don't know what the feelings of anybody here is, but what did you think of the portrayal of her?
Unbelievably good.
You too, Eileen.
Yeah, I thought she did a really great job. I'm a huge
Yeah.
Emma Thompson fan, so there's
Yeah.
that. But her gestures and her accent, knowing who Emma Thompson is as an
Oh,
actor,
I know. Yeah,
she
yeah.
did amazing work. Amazing.
Did you realize, by the way, that Adrian Lester, who played Henry, is also British?
No.
Yes, he is. But he did a great job too. Yeah.
But what else has he been in other films since?
He was in some other things, but
Yeah.
I don't know what happened to him, and I didn't look him up. But I
Yeah.
was wondering about that. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, Jocelyn.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I mean, one of the main criticisms of Hillary has been her inability to relate to her, I guess.
Yeah.
And I felt like Emma Thompson made her very relatable.
That's true, and I think that people who really know her feel that. And but she's so image conscious. And I think that's really true.
I think her drive is another criticism, and part of it is because she's a woman, and that she was pushing so hard
Right.
to get to the top has always been one of the things that's been hugely criticized about her, while standing next to her husband who cheated on her so much. I think those two things didn't balance with people, and that really hurt her in the way
Well,
she did.
Okay, there's one thing that isn't in the movie, and I have seen Bill quoted about this, and I will kick myself for the rest of my life because I met somebody on a cruise who might have answered this question for me, but I didn't ask her, and I'm really upset about it. And what Bill has been quoted as saying is that even in 1992, that is when the movie was taking place in the first run, he was saying it's going to be 8 years of Bill, 8 years of Hill. And so it really makes the movie more interesting if you imagine that the reason she feels so much at stake at this and is putting up with so much is that she feels her future is at stake too, for which she has these grand plans. But I don't know if that's true. The woman I met was older. She was a silent. She had been a nonprofit activist, and she had met them back in '92 and had known them ever since. So I really wish I had asked her that question, but I didn't. So, but yeah, okay, Janie. Janie,
Yeah, I think it's an incredible drive that she had for success, and obviously, as has been mentioned before, her willingness to put up with her husband's philandering and all the rest of it. She just, even though she would explode and be angry with him, she just kept going. I thought the last scene with the inauguration, where she and her husband are dancing, and the expression on her face is amazing. The beautiful red, gorgeous dress, and the camera angle looking down, so that you've got almost this ballroom scene, but the look on her face is such one of "we won." I thought that was just a very a stunning scene.
Yes.
Regal.
Michael appears to be agreeing with you. Yes. All right. I think Libby is expressing the tragedy of boomer idealism, or boomer political idealism, anyway, that she really did believe in so deeply. She's also, I think, what's the word I'm looking for? She's finally destroyed by having been seduced by the two of them. I mean, not seduced sexually, but in every other way, and by where this has led her. And yes, that they have betrayed her ideals. And that is very sad. And as Michael once said to me when we talked about this movie once before, how Kathy Bates did not win the Oscar for that performance, I will never know. And I can't remember who actually did, but that was really out of this world. But again, well, I don't know. This happens with every generation, that there are certain charismatic people that people attach themselves to, and then those people will put up with almost anything. And it might be worse among boomers though. Okay, we're about at the end now. I had a couple of things about millennial childhood, but they will go just as well next week. When
We just lost you.
Okay, I had a couple of clips about millennial childhood, but they will go just as well next week. And we have come to the end of our time.
We lost David. We completely lost you.
Gwyneth Paltrow won it that year.
Supporting actor? No, it was. What did Gwyneth Paltrow win supporting for?
Actress. Oh, sorry. Actress in a supporting role. Judi Dench. My apologies.
Oh, for that 5-minute performance in Shakespeare in Love?
Well, considering Harvey Weinstein really campaigned for that stuff.
Okay, well, we don't want to open that can of worms.
In a supporting role. Yep.
In Shakespeare in Love?
Yep.
When she was on the screen for about 8 minutes, I think. That's really amazing. Yeah, right. Okay, well, anyway. That's the real fun thing about the Oscars, is that it's so rare that the right person actually does get it, that it makes it a very special moment when they do, because it happens so rarely. Lou Gossett did get it for An Officer and a Gentleman, and I've always been very happy about that. Okay. So I guess that's about that. And again, if you are in lockdown and have a good many hours to kill, you couldn't do better than reading All the King's Men. Neither of the movies really managed to catch it at all. It's an amazing document, and the Book of Primary Colors is pretty amazing too, although you've seen pretty much what you had to do. But I did feel so grateful to Mike Nichols and Elaine May for doing such an amazing job. Okay, that's that, I guess. I do want to say, by the way, well, no, I'll write a note about this. I'll write a note about this. Okay.
Thanks, Dave.
Not at all. Thank you.
See you next week.
Thanks, David. See you next week.
See you
Bye-bye.
next week.
Everyone, take care.
Bye. Yep.
Take care.